got about 5 minutes for questions, and I get to play Phil Donahue. Well, boy, I just showed how old I am. I get to play, let's see, who's the, Ellen. I'll be Ellen today. So any questions, I'm going to run around and any questions for any of the panelists? Let's see, is this working? Yes. Lois.
Hi, Lois Epstein, member of the trust. My question is for Jeff, related to the number of incidents, tragedies that we've had in the past couple of years that I think we're all at least somewhat familiar. I'll just yell. What is PHMSA's analyses showing? You put a list of potential causes. Is there any thinking about whether there's something systemic out there? I mean, that's an obvious question to be asking. I don't know if there's any patterns. I think a lot of us would like to know if there's any patterns. You know, basically tell us what you're learning, so we could act on that potentially in the future. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lois. And if you couldn't hear, she just was basically asking what are we learning from all these tragic events that have been happening, and thank you for that. I actually made a note to myself, and Andy can verify, top note that I wanted to comment on and to touch back to Chris Hart. You know, I believe that to make progress to zero, we have to adopt a learning culture. You know, it's not, safety culture is so amorphous. I personally struggle with what we mean by that. But a learning culture, or people who are, you know, engaged in trying to do the right thing, as Chris said, is really crucial to success. So, you know, I'm just going to comment for Jeff. You know, I'm not commenting for the administration. It's interesting as you look at that, Lois, because there are not a lot of common connections in some of these. What I see personally is a real failure to look at the underpinnings of risk assessment. You know, what do you really know about your system? What do you really know about the environment within which your system operates, right? What's around your system that could be impacted by a failure? And so, again, back to Chris, because I think that's really what we do need to be talking about. What's wrong in that fundamental system that people overlook things like this? You know, San Bruno, I think, is just, you know, I'm not here to pick on anyone. I think the people who were operating, you know, PG&E weren't, you know, there when that was done. How did they know at that time what kind of material was used, you know? So really, I don't see a lot of common connections except for a need for infinitely more rigorous records review, which I do see going on, by the way. I see a lot of companies scrambling and spending a ton of time and effort doing it, and I see that as a silver lining. With those records, they need to be doing better risk assessments, you know, and I think with that they can take better preventive and mitigative measures. So that would be my thought.
Anybody else?
I'm Randall Allen. I've noticed over the years that a number of pipeline companies have recognized the contribution of controller error to the rate of incidents, and they've taken steps to make their pipelines self-protecting with regard to MAOP excursions, handling surge in case of block valve closes and such like that. And the idea there is to take away any possible influence of the controller on the integrity of the pipeline, such that the worst he can do is contaminate fluids in a tank with a dissimilar fluid, but nothing becomes a fugitive emission. The question I have is, are there any issues being considered in terms of legislation to require that?
Maybe I'll start, and anybody feel free to jump in. You know, very important issue. We had completed rulemaking on what's called control room management rules, gosh, you know, what is it, a year or two ago at that point. We've just begun implementing oversight of that program. There's a ton of information. I can, you know, talk to you later too about this, but a ton of information on our website on that. You know, the things that, so there is a framework out there right now. I think many of the companies have spent a lot of time as you've indicated, trying to tune up control room, and yet, you seem to be talking about liquids, but as we saw in the gas world, there can be hiccups in the system, that the controller really, wasn't the one creating that hiccup that can lead to disastrous consequences. I know the NTSB, if Chris Hart was here, would talk about the influence of fatigue, and these the shifts that people work, shift pattern, and the influence on fatigue. So I think there's a lot going on in control room right now, and I know the companies are making a lot of progress, but we have begun oversight of control room management rules. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
I've not heard of anyone in the legislative context suggesting changes need to be made. I think there's a lot of people who've been impressed by the control room management rule. And of course, there's also knowledge that those deadlines have been accelerated, and then NTSB has removed control room from some of the recommendations to PHMSA. So I think there's great interest in seeing how those rules perform. And I know our industry works on the issues that you were talking about in control room, and look forward to implementing these.
We're going to try to do it way in the back here, and a familiar face.
Stacy Gerard, my question is for Jeff. If you could clarify what you meant by...
She's not allowed to ask questions. Sorry.
I'm not sure we would understand what you meant by the public needs to do its job. The public needs to do its job. What would that be?
Don't give me any assignments.
Carl, I can't even believe you gave the mic to her. No, just kidding, of course. Stacy and I have known each other for 15 plus years. So I'm assuming Stacy, that was a softball. Was that it? Carl referred to the concept as he was closing, and I'm thankful to him for doing that, about shared responsibility. It's really interesting as you get into this business, and of course we live it, so it's too obvious to us that as we go into communities across the country after a failure, time and time again people say, we didn't know, whether it was excavation damage, which we see frequently. I see homeowners hurt or killed, by not doing the right thing. I see communities not living up to the standards of managing encroachment, around pipelines. That, in some ways, it's the public. But public needs to get smarter about their dependencies, I think, as well. All the pressure that goes to the rate setters, for example. The only thing people in this country, whether it's this issue or anything, they want what they want, but they don't want to pay for it. So fundamentally, I think if we're going to depend on this energy, and we've got, I would say, a fairly interesting future ahead of us on energy. I'm now seeing, oil discoveries, in places like Colorado from the shale plays, and in Michigan, in Ohio, and the gas plays. So we have a fairly bright domestic energy picture, but to manage that and to come out of it safely and smartly, and really keep that money in the country and churning here, we all have to get a lot smarter. We need to demand more of our public officials, need to take time to look at some of the stuff that Carl is putting up there, let their voices be heard. Frequently in our debates, what we have, with no offense to anyone, is we have the polar opposites talking. But what we're really here to do is regulate to the benefit of the masses. And I guess my only thing is I'd like to see the masses get a lot smarter about their dependencies and what they can do to help to minimize their risks.
Thank you. We need to move on. We've out of time. All these folks will be here, so track them down and ask your questions. Let's give them a round of applause. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, so let's try to come back at about 5 after or so, and we're going to hear from some of the affected individuals from San Bruno next.